Hi family, this is your boy Patrick Okra here, and once again welcome to Patrick's piano class. And as always, I am excited. Yes, I am excited because I get to share and grow with you all. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about everything you need to know about chords. All right, everything you need to know about chords. I've seen most of your comments asking me, how do you know the exact chords to use, when implementing some of the concepts that I've shared in, I think, the recent videos that I've uploaded on YouTube. So today, I want to take my time and explain chords and how you can derive them. All right, and also to build a chord bank so that no chord under the sun escapes you. So that is what this video promises to achieve, that at the end of this video, no chord escapes you. All right, you are going to be able to build a chord bank, and you are going to be able to derive chords for yourself. All right, so without wasting much time, let's get straight into it. Now, a little caution, this video might be a bit longer because of the information, the load of information that I'll be sharing today. And also at the end of the video, I will be sharing an announcement with you also. You don't want to miss even a second in this video. I will encourage you to stay through to the end of this video. Okay, so that being said, let's get straight into it. So what are chords? Basically, now per the Google definition, chords are more than two notes played at the same time. Right, chords are more than two notes played at the same time. But for me, chords are the same as scales. That is, if you ask me what chords are basically scales. All right, and so instead of defining what a chord is, rather let's define what scales are. Okay, and scales are basically group of notes arranged in ascending or descending order. All right, so chords, as I said, and scales are the same thing. Okay, and what are scales? Scales are a group of notes arranged in ascending or descending order. Okay, now there are so many types of scales, and out of these many scales that we have, there are four scales that is going to help us derive our chords. Basically, out of these many scales, only four scales. All right, so we are going to just pick four scales out of these scales, and then these four scales are going to help us derive almost all the chords you keep hearing all these professional players use. All right. That being said, the first chord is the major scale. The first scale is the major scale. The second one is the melodic minor scale. The third one is the diminished scale, and the last one is the whole tone scale. Now let me repeat. The first one is the major scale. The second one is the melodic minor scale. The third one is the diminished scale, and the last one is the whole tone scale. All right, so these are the four types of scales that are going to help us derive our chords. Okay, but before you can be able to, or before we start deriving our chords, there is a concept called modes, M-O-D-E-S, and modes are going to help us derive our chords. So what are modes? Modes are essentially new scales built from existing scales. All right, modes are new scales built from existing scales, so they are not a standalone. They come from somewhere. All right, so that being said, let's go straight into building our chords. Okay, but before that, let's pick the first scale, which is the major scale. Now, for the purposes of this class, I'm going to be in the key of C. All right, and I'm sure we know our keys. Sorry. So our first scale, which is the major scale, in this case, we are in the key of C. So this is how the major scale, or this is how this major scale of C is built. All right, it's built using interval of tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. All right, so essentially what that means is that the major scale of the key of C is full of white notes, right? All white keys, right? So again, from C, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. All right. So now that we know our major scale of the key of C, the next thing we want to do is to build our modes Okay, and so per the definition of what a mode is new scale built from existing scale. And scales are essentially group of notes arranged in ascending or descending order. So we have these group of notes arranged in ascending order or descending order, right? So this is what we call scales, all right, scale. And we want to build our modes from this scale. And a mode is a new scale that is being built from an existing scale, all right? So let's pick our first mode, or let's derive our first mode. So what we are going to do is we are going to pick our first mode of the scale and play the last mode of the scale, which is essentially the same thing, or an octave higher, all right? And then play everything in between, okay? So now in this case, we have our major scale, right? But let's assume that there's a shadow of the same thing, okay, that is producing the first mode for us, okay? So even though this is the major scale, let's assume that there is a shadow of the same thing, okay? So that way, this becomes our first mode, okay? And the name of this mode is Ionian mode in theory, okay? And that is what is reading on the screen, Ionian, Ionian mode. So that becomes the first name, that becomes the first mode of the scale, all right? And the name is Ionian mode, okay? So you want to do that to every note that forms the scale. That's the C major scale, all right? So let's do the same thing to the second note. So you pick the second note and play an octave higher, same thing above it, and you play everything in between, and you get your second mode. Now the name of this second mode is called Dorian mode. Dorian mode, right? Dorian mode. And you want to do the same thing to the third one. You get what we call Phrygian mode. You want to do the same thing to the fourth one, and you get what we call the Lydian mode, all right? Now when you move on, you're going to get the Mixo-Lydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and then back to the Ionian mode. So let me start again. Ionian mode, the Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixo-Lydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and back to Ionian. All right. So these are the modes that are going to help us derive our chords. Okay, that are going to help us derive our chords. Now, this concept, or what I'm about to teach you, will best explain what I mentioned in my previous video, that we don't play in keys, but we play from keys. All right. So everything, what I'm about to share now, is going to help you understand that statement more. All right. So, but before that, let's start building our chords. Now, before we started building our modes, I made mention that chords and scales are the same thing. Okay. So basically, what I've played is a chord. All right. But the reason why it doesn't sound nice, or doesn't really sound like a chord, is because of the interval with which I have played the notes or the scale. All right. And so in music, basically, we build chords using the interval of thirds. Okay. Now, intervals is another concept. Okay. But for the purpose of this class, we are just going to use the interval of thirds to build our chords. All right. So that is going to be like a formula for us. Okay. So we are going to use that as a formula to build our chords using the same notes in the scale. All right. Now, so when we pick our first mode, which is the Ionian mode, first thing we want to do is to use our formula, which is the interval of thirds formula. Okay. So what you are going to do is that you are going to pick, now what we are doing is that this is our first mode. We are going to pick our first mode, and then we are going to build our chord using the interval of thirds formula. But before we start building our chords, let's look at something here. let's look at the number of notes that forms the scale. All right? Let's look at the number of notes that forms the scale. Okay, and here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but the 8 is basically the same as the 1. Okay, so let's just say 7 notes. Okay, 7 notes. Now, the goal is to build the chord in such a way that it covers every note that forms the scale. Okay, that is, if you are building the chords, you should be able to build the chord so that it covers all the notes that forms the scale. All right, so we have 7 notes that forms the scale. That means that we are going to build a 7-note chord. All right, because what that means that anytime you get to 7, the 7th note, all the notes that forms this type of scale gets exhausted. All right, so that is the goal. So that being said, let's get straight into it. So you want to pick your first note and use the interval of thirds. So this is what you're going to do. You count 1 up to 3 from where you are. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now, as I said, we should be able to build a chord such that it covers all the 7 notes that forms the scale. All right. But before you get to your 7th note, anytime you build a chord and get your first 4 notes, you give it a pause. Okay? Anytime you build a chord and get your first 4 notes, you give it a pause. Now, the first 4 notes becomes your main chord. Okay? The first 4 notes becomes your main chord. Okay, so in this case, we have 2, 3, 4. These are the first 4 notes. And that becomes our main chord. Now, the rest of the notes, okay, that should add up to the 7 becomes what we call extended notes. Extended notes or added notes. All right? Extended notes or added notes. Okay. So, anytime you are building your chords and you get these 4 notes, the next thing you want to do, you want to give it a pause, name the chord before you add the extended notes to it, or before you add the rest of the notes to make up the 7 notes that form the scale. All right. So in this case, we have our first 4 notes. The next question is, how do we name this chord? All we know is that we've been able to get our first 4 notes using the interval of thirds formula. That is counting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, how do we name this chord? All right. Now, in my previous video, I made mention that in every chord, the 3rd and the 7th are the most important note, right? And the reason why the 3rd and the 7th are the most important note is because the 3rd and the 7th determines the quality of the chord, hence the name of the chord. All right. So if you want to give this chord a name, you have to look at the 3rd and the 7th. All right. The 3rd and the 7th will determine the quality as well as the name of this chord. Now, in this case, what is the 3rd of this chord and what is the 7th of this chord? So I have my 1, 2, 3. So this is the 3rd. Okay, this is the 3rd. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this will be my 7th. So I have my 3rd and my 7th. Okay. Now, if you want to determine the name of the chord, all right, in music theory, anytime you have a 3rd and a 7th, okay, existing in a chord, the name of the chord becomes a major 7th chord. Now, we have the 3rd is a major 3rd and the 7th is a major 7th, right? So you get what we call a major 7th chord. A major 7th chord. All right. So that is how you name the chord. After naming the chord, what you want to do next is to add extended notes. All right. And the extended notes are the notes that are in between what you've already played. But because we don't want to play it like the scale, because the moment I add the D, the F, and the A, to it, we get the same thing as the scale. But because we are using the interval of thirds formula, we cannot play it here. All right, so what we do is that we will still continue to use the interval of thirds formula. And what that is going to give us is that it's going to give us this same note here. Because from here, if you count 1 up to 3, 1, 2, 3, you're going to get D, which is the same as this. If you count 1 up to 3 from D, you're going to get 11. Okay, so this D from here, 1, 2, 3, you're going to get F, 1, 2, 3, you're going to get A. So you're going to get the same note here, D, F, A, here, D, F, A. Now, using the number system, if you are counting from the first note, you realize that the last note is going to be number 13. That is, the A is going to be number 13. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay. And the moment we get this note, we have exhausted all the notes that forms the first mode of the C major scale. Okay, so this becomes a full chord. All right. Now, this also explains the reason why, in theory, we only have up to a 13th chord. All right, you always see up to a 13th chord, like a major 7th or major 13th, maybe with a natural 9 and a natural 13. Okay, you always see like a dominant with a 13. You always see, like, you understand, because it ends on the 13. Okay, because when you get to the 13, all the notes are exhausted. You exhaust all the notes that forms the scale. Okay, so we have our first chord, full chord. Actually, we have our first full chord. All right, we have our first full chord, and this chord only exists in theory. For your information, this chord only exists in theory. It's rarely used. Now, the reason why this chord, even though we have a full chord, but only exists in theory and rarely used, is because of the presence of what we call an avoid note. Now, avoid note is a concept in music that simply means avoid the note. Okay, avoid note is a concept in music theory that simply means avoid the note. So what that means is that there is a note in this chord you need to avoid. Okay, and why do we have to avoid some of the notes in a chord? Why do we have to avoid any note in a chord? The reason is that the avoid note ruins the quality of the chord in terms of the sound the chord has on the ears. Now, per the definition of what music is supposed to be any sound that is pleasant to the ears. Okay, and so it is advised that there are some notes you don't play because it ruins the quality of the chord you are playing, which makes that chord unpleasant to the human ear. Okay, but even though this is just theory, it is relative, and it is based on preference, because what might sound nice to you might not sound nice to me. Okay, so this is theory. Okay, but then again, it depends on the individual ears. Okay, but in theory, it is advised that you don't play an avoid note against any chord because it ruins the quality of the chord. All right, so as I mentioned, while this chord exists in theory, it is rarely used because there's an avoid note. All right, so I'm sure you're asking yourself, so how do you know if there's an avoid note in a chord? All right, now before I explain, I must say that among the four basic scales that I mentioned, the most difficult one is the major scale. All right, the most difficult one to talk or cover is the major scale. The reason is that is because of the presence of this avoid note concept. All right, so it kind of like makes it tedious, because after building the chord, and the next thing you're going to ask yourselves is that is there an avoid note in this chord? All right, which makes it a bit tedious to understand. But make sure you understand this concept because it is really, really, really going to help you. Okay, so now how do we find the avoid note? How do we know that there is an avoid note in this chord that we are building? All right, so now let's come back to our 4-note chord. All right, an avoid note number 1 should be any of the extended notes. All right, so it could be the 9, it could be the 11, or it could be the 13. So an avoid note is any of them. Now it could be just one, or it could be two. It could be two, all right, or just one. Okay, so what we have here, okay, is what we call chord tones in music. Chord tones. Now they are chord tones because they are the note that forms the chord. Any note that forms the chord in music is what we call chord tones. So this is how you know there's an avoid note in a chord. Per definition, the avoid note is a flat ninth above any of the chord tones that I have played in this case. All right. So if I want to know the avoid note should be a flat ninth above any of the chord tones here. So the chord tones are the blue notes you are seeing here, which is the C, E, G, and B. Okay. And above each chord tone, there is an extended note. Remember, I said an avoid note should be any of the extended notes. And these extended notes are above these chord tones. These extended notes are above these chord tones in this case. So what they are saying is that this should be a flat ninth of this. That is in reference to the key of C. This should be a flat ninth. For you to be able to know that this is an avoid note, this note, which is above C, should be a flat ninth of the C. Okay, and for you to be able to know that this F, which is an extended note and also is above the E, this F should be a flat ninth in E. That is in reference to the E major scale. This note should be a flat ninth. Okay, now the same thing applies to this. In reference to G major scale, A should be a flat ninth. So let's look at it well. In the key of C, okay, D is a natural 9. Remember, D is the same as a 9. D is a natural 9. So D is not an avoid note. Now, in the key of E, that is, if you are using the E major scale, F is a flat 9. F is not a natural 9. So F becomes an avoid note. Okay, F becomes an avoid note. Now, in the key of G, A is a natural 9. So A is not an avoid note. So far, we only have one note, which is the F, as the avoid note. Okay, so that is why in theory, or even in real time, you will never hear anybody saying that play me a major 7th with a natural 11. No, the reason why nobody says that is because the natural 11 is the avoid note and it ruins the quality of the chord. So let's listen to the C major 7th without any of the extended notes. It sounds nice, right? Now if I add a 9th to it, it sounds cool. If I add the 13th to it, it sounds perfect. But the moment I add a natural 11th to it, listen to how it sounds. It ruins the quality of the chord. And so that is why you have to avoid the avoid note. Because the moment you play the F, which is the natural 11th, against the C major 7th, you ruin the quality of the chord. So in theory, you avoid the natural 11. And so that is why I said while this chord exists in theory, it is rarely used. So what is advised is that instead of playing that is if you really want to use this chord, that is the major 7 from the Ionian mode, it is advised that you only play the avoid note as a passing note when improvising. Okay, but not as a target note against the chord, because the moment you play it as a target note against the chord, you ruin the quality of the chord. So you don't want to do that. What you want to do is to play the avoid note as a passing note. All right. So that is it for the first mode. So on the first mode, we had a major seventh chord, but there was an avoid note, which is the natural 11th. Now, we are going to get the same major seventh chord in a different mode, but without an avoid note. Okay, so anytime you are playing or you want to play a major seventh that doesn't have an avoid note, there is one that we are going to actually get when we get to the fourth mode. All right, and that one doesn't have any avoid note. The only thing is that that one has a sharp 11. Remember this one, the natural 11 is the avoid note, but there is another one on the fourth mode that doesn't have an avoid note, okay, but has a sharp 11 instead of the natural 11. All right, so let's move on. That means let's move on to the next note or the next mode, all right, which is the Dorian mode. Okay, so when you get to the next mode, what do? You use the interval of thirds formula to build your chord. All right, so from here you move 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 and you get your main chord. Remember, anytime you get the 4 notes, that becomes your main chord. So this becomes our main chord. Anything we add to this becomes what we call an extended or added note. All right, so this is our main chord. Now the next thing we want to do is to find out if there's an avoid note in this chord. All right, and how do we do that? These are the chord tones, all right, and these are the notes above the chord tones, and one of them should be a flat 9, okay, above any of the chord tones. So you ask yourself that in a key of D, is E a natural 9 or a flat 9? Now in the key of D, E is a natural 9, so E is not an avoid note. Now in the key of F, G is the natural 9, so G is not an avoid note. Okay, now in the key of A, B is a natural 9, so B is not an avoid note. So sorry, I think I skipped the moment where you had to name the chord, right? So when you get your chord, the next thing you want to do is to name the chord before finding out if there's an avoid note. So first thing, you build your chord using an interval of third. Anytime you get your 4 notes, you give it a pause, you name the chord, and then you find out if there's an avoid note. Okay, so in this case, the third and the 7 will determine the name of the chord, all right? And in this case, the third here, that is in reference to D. D becomes our root. In reference to the key of D, this is a minor third and this is a minor 7th, all right? Now, the reason why this is a minor third and this is a minor 7th is because we are only using the notes that forms the C major scale, all right, or the D Dorian mode in this case. And so we cannot use any other note apart from the note that forms the D Dorian mode or the C major scale, all right. And so that is why, even though our root note is D, we couldn't use this F sharp as the major third and this C sharp as our major 7th. All right. Now, the moment we use these notes, it means that we are no more in the Dorian mode or the C major scale. All right. But everything we are doing should be under the C major scale or the D Dorian mode. All right. And so that is why we have a minor third instead and the major 7th instead. Okay, so this becomes our first D minor 7th chord. So that is to say that in music, anytime you have a minor third and a minor third and a minor 7th interval in a chord, automatically the name of the chord becomes a minor 7th chord. All right, the name becomes a minor 7th chord. So in this case, we have a D minor 7th chord. Now, because we have already gone through the note to find out if there's an avoid note or not, we already know that there are no avoid notes in this chord. So you can freely add all your extended notes to this chord to form the D Dorian mode, all right? Now, let me explain something here, and this will really enlighten you, okay? Now, watch this. We've gotten our first minor 7th chord, okay, without any avoid notes in this scale. That is to say that anytime you play a minor 7th chord, irrespective of the key you are playing or irrespective of the chord progression you are playing, the minor 7 can be your 1, or your minor 7 can be your 6, or the minor 7 can be your 2, based on the chord progression you're playing, or based on the key you're playing in. But because of this concept, even if the minor 7th chord you are playing, based on the chord progression, is a 6, in theory, it is not seen as a 6. It is seen as a 2. The reason is because we had the minor 7th chord on the second mode of the C major scale, or we had the minor 7th chord on the second mode of the major scale. In this case, C major scale. All right. Now, let me put that into practice, okay, so that you really understand what I'm trying to say. And this also explains why we don't play in keys, but play from keys. Okay, so let's assume that we are playing the key of F, okay, and we have a chord progression that moves from the 1 to the 6 to the 2 to a 5. Now, on the 1, let's say I'm playing a major 7th. On the 2, I'm playing a minor 7th. Okay, sorry, on the 6, I'm playing a minor 7th. And on the 2, I'm playing a minor 7th again. And on the 5, I'm playing a suspended chord. Back to the C major, the F major 7. All right. So let's just say in the key of F, this is our chord progression: a 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. Okay. So the 1 is a major 7th. The 2 is a minor 7th. Why do I keep saying 2? The 1 is a major 7th. The 6 is a minor 7th. The 2 is a minor 7th. The 5 is a sus. So let's just say you have a song, that has this chord progression. Now, even though on your 6, that is looking at it from the key of F, because that is what we are playing in. That's what is assumed you're playing in. Okay, you're playing the key of F. Even though on the 6th degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even though on the 6th degree of F, the chord you are playing is a minor 7th chord, right? Even though in F the chord is a minor 7th, in theory, this chord doesn't belong to F. This chord belongs to C. The reason is that all minor 7th chords come from the second mode of the major scale, because that is the only time we had a minor 7th chord without any avoid note. So it doesn't really matter the key you're playing. The moment you hit a minor chord, even if it's coming from the 6th mode of the key you're playing in, you are thinking that no, it is not from the 6th, it's coming from the second mode. So in this case, if I'm supposed to improvise on this given chord, I'm going to use, even though we are playing in F, I'm going to use the key of C to improvise on this given chord, which is the D minor 7th chord. Do you understand how this works? So what we are doing, that is deriving the chords, is helping us to understand the various corresponding modes and scales these chords, share or come from. Okay, so it doesn't really matter the key you are playing. All right, all that you need to know is that which scale is this chord coming from. Once you know that, you begin to see the keys differently, because even though I'm playing in F, any minor 7th chord I play in the key of F supposedly doesn't it belong to F. It belongs to the second mode of a different key. Now, so from the 6, we move to the 2. So in this case, this 2 is a minor chord. So obviously, since the minor 7th is coming from the second mode of a certain key, so this 2 will come from F. All right, but let's just say if, the 1 was a minor 7th chord. Even though it's a 1 in F, but because it's a minor 7th chord and we only had the minor 7th on the second mode of the major scale, this chord doesn't belong to F, but rather E flat major scale, because we only had the minor 7th from the second mode, which is a Dorian mode of a certain key. In this case, we use the key of C. All right, but that is the definition. So because we were able to derive it from the second mode of the major scale, in this case, F minor 7th becomes it becomes the minor 7th of E flat, okay, because we can only get a minor 7 from a Dorian mode, and we had this minor 7 without any avoid note, okay. So automatically this minor 7 comes from E flat. So let's assume if you are playing in the key of A flat and you hit the 6th note and you are asked to improvise. You improvise using the key of E flat major scale. See how that works. So this is how come these jazz pianist players are able to improvise on any chord progression. Okay, because these chords do come from different scales, from different keys altogether. So no chord belongs to, like, there's not like a concept where all the chords belongs to one key. Do you understand? So based on this theory, anytime you're given a chord progression, you know that, okay, this chord comes from this key, this chord comes from this key, this chord comes from this key. All right? So you are not boxed into thinking that, oh, you can only use the major scale, or you can only use the scale from the key you are playing to improvise on the chord progression. Like for some of you, if you are given the 6-2-5-1 chord progression in F, all you do is to use the F major scale. But that is not it. I mean, while this sounds good, you can equally sound more advanced, okay? See how that went to? See, on the D minor, because see how that works. Okay, so that was just by the way. Let's come back to our D Dorian mode, all right? Now, so far, we've been able to build 2 chords. The first one is rarely used. So I have a table that I'm sharing. I'm going to share with you on the top of the screen. You can see from there. Now, you've only been able to build 2 chords. The first one, I would say, is not useful because of the presence of the avoid note, okay? Now, the second one is very useful because it doesn't have any avoid note, okay? It doesn't have any avoid note in it, okay? And that is the minor 7th chord. With a natural 9, you can add a natural 9, you can add a natural 11th to it, you can add a natural 13th to it, all right? So that is it for the second mode. So let's move on to the third mode. Now, on the third mode, we have the Phrygian mode. Now, the same concept, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, anytime you get your 4-note chord, you give it a pause and name the chord. Now, this chord is a minor 7th chord, all right? But because we've already gotten a minor 7th chord that doesn't have any avoid note, why stress yourself trying to find whether there's an avoid note? Now, as a matter of fact, if you want to know, there is 2 avoid notes in this chord. So while this chord exists in theory, it's not useful, okay? Now, rather, in theory, what they did was they suspended this chord, all right? But I will talk about it when I get to the melodic minor, okay? And that is what we call the Phrygian chord, all right? All right? I'll talk about when we get to the melodic minor. But let's just say that this chord doesn't exist in theory because there's already a minor 7th chord that doesn't have any avoid notes. So let's throw this chord away. So far, we've been able to build 3 chords from a major scale, but only one is useful. So let's move on to the 4th mode. Now, remember I told you that the major 7th we had on the 1st mode, we will get the same thing on the 4th mode. Now, on the 4th mode, you get a major 7th without any avoid note. Okay, now you can cross-check using the definition that I shared earlier on. There are no avoid notes in this chord, so this chord is very useful. So that also means, now remember, this is a major 7th chord, okay? You are free to use any of the extended notes, all right? So you can add the 9, the sharp 11, and the natural 13. So the sharp 11 is the only thing that makes it different from the first one. Remember, the first one, the natural 11th made it an avoid note, but here, there's a sharp 11, okay, and there are no avoid notes in this chord, okay. So this is a full major 13 chord, which sounds okay. This sounds very cool, very, restful and tasteful than the first one, which had the natural 11. Compare this to this. This sounds cool. This, because of the natural 11, doesn't sound cool. Now, this also means that anytime you are playing, you are given a chord progression, all right, to improvise, okay, or to play. Now, even though now, let me use the same example. Even though in the key of F, okay, let's just say the first chord progression, all right, the first chord was F major 7. Even though in the key of F, this is an F major 7 and it's on the 1. This chord doesn't belong to F. The moment you hit any major 7th chord, just know that it is the 4 of a different key, because we only had our first major 7 that doesn't have any avoid note on the 4th mode. So that means that anytime, irrespective of the key you are playing, you hit on a major 7th chord, that chord can be even on the 1 based on the key you are playing, but it doesn't belong to the 1. It belongs to the 4th mode of a different key. Do you understand? Because we were able to get that major 7th on the 4th mode of our major scale. All right. Now, this entire concept is what we call the scale harmonization concept, which is very important, which saved me. This concept is what saved me from most of these YouTubers that were not teaching anything there. All right. And so please do understand this. Because we had the major 7th on the 4th mode, and this major 7 didn't have any avoid note. Anytime you play a major 7th chord, in your mind, you are playing the 4th mode of a certain key. So if you want to do a passing note, if anything you want to do, see that target chord, the major 7th, as a 4, not a 1. All right. So if I want to improvise on this F major 7, I'm going to use C. Or I'm going to use the F Dorian, which is the same as the C major scale. All right. That sounds cool, right? So let's just say in the key of C sharp, right? Let's say in the key of C sharp, there's a song. Let's say I want to end on C sharp. Now, even though the chord is a C sharp major 7th, but in my mind, I'm playing the 4 of A flat. Okay, so what can I do in A flat to get me to the 4, which is my 1 in C sharp? Do you see how this works? Okay, so what I'll do is that maybe I'll play a 2-5-1 to the 4 in A flat, and it will lead me perfectly to my 1 in C sharp. So a 2-5-1 in A, you can have so many different options to choose from. That is in terms of the chords. So you can have a normal 2 like this, which is 6 in C sharp. But I'm just saying in A flat, I'm thinking in A flat. So 2-5-1 to the 1. So even though I'm playing C sharp, I'm playing 2-5 to the 1, to the 4. Sorry, in A flat, but it resolves perfectly in C sharp, and it feels as if I'm going to the 1. But in my mind, I'm playing a 2-5-1 in A flat. So you see how that works. So that is the freedom of expression I've been preaching all this while. Now let's move on to the 5th mode, all right? Now, on the 5th mode of the major scale, which is the mixolydian, we have our first dominant chord, all right? We have our first dominant chord. Now, how do I know there's a dominant chord? Remember, anytime you build a 4-note chord, the next thing you want to do is to name the chord. Now, we have a major 3rd and a minor 7th. And in theory, anytime you have a major 3rd and a minor 7th, you get a dominant chord. So, in reference to G, this is a minor 7th, this is a major 3rd. So this becomes a dominant chord. All right. Now, and all dominant chords create tension. Now, I'll talk in a separate video about the qualities of the chords, and how you can use them well. All right. We have our first dominant chord, but in theory, what happened was, instead of them continuing like building the extended notes to it, because there's an avoid note in this chord, they made this chord a suspended chord in theory. Now, they made this chord a suspended chord because of the sound. But before that, let's find out if there are avoid notes, all right? Now this is a natural ninth of G. So this is not an avoid note, but this note is an avoid note because this C here is a flat ninth of B. So this C is an avoid note, all right? Now, this E is not an avoid note because the natural ninth of D. Okay, so what happened was, normally they will render this chord useless in theory, not useful because of the presence of the avoid note. But what happened was, they made it a suspended. They made the avoid note part of the main chord. All right, so this C is the avoid note. They made it part of the main chord. The reason is because of the quality of the chord. Now, this is a dominant chord. Okay, this is a dominant chord. And dominant chord, because of the tension it creates, if you omit the third and make it a 4, you create a very nice suspended chord. Okay, so that is what happened in theory. Because of the sound, because of the quality of the chord, they made it a suspended chord. Now, this is not just a suspended 4 chord, but this is a dominant suspended 4 chord. So this becomes our first dominant suspended 4 chord. All right. Now, because the natural 11 has been already added to the main chord, we only have 2 extended notes left. That is the 9 and the 13. That is the 9 and the 13. Okay. And so this chord is very useful. And for most of you, especially in this part of the world, Africa, you call this chord 4 over 5. Fa, like the 4 chord over the 5. So you typically hear or see people play, for example, in C, you see them play the 5 on their root and play the 4 on their right hand to resolve to the 1. Now that 4 over 5 in theory is what we call the dominant suspended 4 chord. So if you didn't know, today you know. To the 1, okay? So in theory, that is the dominant suspended 4 chord, all right? And it's coming from the 5th mode of the major scale. So that also means that anytime you are playing any given chord progression and you come across a suspended dominant 4 chord with a natural 9 and a natural 13, automatically you know that it's coming from the 5th mode of a different key. It could be that chord is resting on the 1 based on the key you are playing, but in theory, you know that it's coming from the 5th mode of a different key. So that is how you think or you approach it. Do you understand? So that is for the 5th mode. So let's move on to the next mode, which is the 6th one. Now the 6th one is going to be rendered useless because it's another minor chord with an avoid note. Remember, we've already gotten a minor chord on the 2nd mode, which doesn't have any avoid notes. So almost all the minor chords we are getting that has an avoid note useless. So let me skip this one. So even though there's a minor 7th chord, it's not useful because there's an avoid note in this chord. So let's move on to the last one, which is also a minor 7th chord, but this minor 7th chord is quite special because this minor 7th chord has what we call a flat 5. All the other minor 7th chords have a natural 5, but this minor 7th chord has a flat 5. Okay, and this minor 7 flat 5 chord is one of the most useful chords in gospel music, even in jazz. Okay, now the minor 7th is also useful. That is the one we had on the major 7th, very useful in gospel, and the major 7th, very useful. The suspended, very useful, and the Locrian, very useful. All right, and this one is the last mode of the major scale. This one is the one the last one we are getting in the major scale. All right, so now there's a half diminished chord, or a minor 7 flat 5 chord. Those are the names given to this chord. So the next thing you want to do is to find out if there are avoid notes in this chord. All right, now there's an avoid note here. Okay, so there's an avoid note in this chord. This is not an avoid note. This is not an avoid note. All right, so there's only one avoid note, but because it's creating tension, in theory, even though there's an avoid note in this chord, the same concept applies to this. You can only play the avoid note as a passing note against the chord, but not the avoid note as a target note against the chord, because the moment you play that, it ruins the quality of the chord. It doesn't make it sound nice. Okay, so if you're playing a minor 7 flat 5 chord, you want to make sure that you avoid avoid note. Or there is another option in the melodic minor scale where we get the same chord. That one doesn't have any avoid note. So if you are looking for minor 7th chord that doesn't have an avoid note, then you want to choose the one in the melodic minor, not the one from the major scale. All right. So that brings us to the end of the major scale. So we've been able to derive all 7 chords, but out of the 7 chords, only 1, 2, 3, I would say, and 4 are useful. Now I'm adding the Lucraine to it because of the sound, all right? But we can see that only 3 are useful out of the 7 chords we're able to build, all right? Now, the reason why only 3 are useful is because out of the 7, only 3 doesn't have the avoid notes. And the first one out of the 7, which is useful, is the Dorian. And the second is the Lydian and the Mixolydian. So on the Dorian, we had a minor 7th chord, which is useful. And on the 4th, which is the Lydian, we had the major 7th, which is useful. And on the 5th mode, we had the dominant suspended 4 chord, which is also useful. All right. So I will say out of the chords we're able to derive from the major scale, only 3 are useful. Okay. So you understand how it works. So what we are doing is that we are building a chord bank. We are building a library of chords. Okay. So that it makes it easier for you to understand the concept I shared in my last 2 uploads. All right. So if you don't understand how I was able to come up with most of the chords I applied, then you should stay glued to this concept that I'm teaching. All right. So this brings us to the end of the major scale. Okay. So if you're looking for chords that you can use the major scale to improvise on, then number 1 is the minor 7th chord. Number 2 is the major 7th chord with a sharp 11. And number 3, the dominant suspended chord. All right. And that doesn't mean that you can not use any of the other chords, but just that you don't play the avoid note against those chords. All right. You can use those chords, but you don't play. That is in terms of your improv. You don't play the avoid note against the chords. All right. So I'm going to end here because the video is getting too long, more than expected, and I'm going to do another video talking about the melodic minor, the diminished, and the whole tone. And as I mentioned, the major scale, even though it looks simple, is the most difficult concept to teach so far as scale harmonization is concerned, because of the presence of the avoid notes. Okay, it made it lengthy, but the rest of the scales do not have any avoid notes in them. Okay, so you just build and then that's it. Okay, and so that being said, all too soon we've come to the end of today's video, and I do want to mention, and this is the announcement, I do want to mention that if you're looking for a private piano tutor who will guide you through your journey, who will guide you through step by step, if you're looking for any private piano tutor to grow with, then you want to hit me up, because I'm offering private piano lessons to everyone that wants to learn and grow with me. So with me, what I always like to do, unlike the other YouTubers who just create websites, do videos and post and ask you to subscribe, no, I want to grow with you. So I'll be giving you assignments, I'll be monitoring your progress. Okay, and that is the benefit you have from me. That is if you join my private lesson. And so if you're looking for a private piano tutor who will guide you through step by step, then please, I'm going to leave my email under the description. So you want to check that out and hit me up so that we grow together. But until then, see you in the next video. Bye-bye.